So I want to actually take you back to why I became an educator in the first place. I was in college. I discovered what I thought was my dream job. And I did everything I could to prepare for the interview. I learned about the organization. I thought about what kinds of questions would be asked. I memorized a script for what I wanted to say just to make sure I got things right. And for reasons that you can now already figure out, I didn't get the job. And I was devastated. And I started to rethink my career aspirations. And I started thinking back to middle school when I was 11 years old. And I remembered a teacher who really inspired me, who sparked some curiosity, particularly about psychology, that I never knew existed before. And I decided that I wanted to actually educate and try to pay that impact forward. And I never actually gave her that feedback. To this day, she doesn't know that she's the reason I became an educator. And I recently discovered that she actually retired early, in her early 50s, because she had burned out. And I couldn't help but wonder, what would have happened if I had actually gone back and given her that feedback and shown how she made a difference in my life and really shaped the trajectory of my entire career? And what if other students had done this too? Now, I know we've all had teachers who've had this kind of impact on us. And if you think about how much you might enjoy going to visit that one teacher or professor who really inspired you, that's a pretty meaningful experience for both sides. So that really got me wondering, what do we actually know about teacher burnout? This was my job interview, by the way. So I got to thinking about, okay, I'm going to get into this teaching profession, and I need to know something about what it's like to be a teacher. And I was really disturbed by what I discovered. If you look at the research evidence on teacher burnout, this is amazingly common. Christina Maslach and her colleagues at Berkeley have actually shown that teaching is the profession where burnout rates, on average, are the highest. Higher than any other profession that you could imagine. Whether you look at firefighting, nuclear power plant operators, doctors and nurses, teachers have worse burnout than all of those groups on average. And we know that this kind of burnout is really costly and consequential. Burned out teachers show lower job performance. Their students actually demonstrate less academic achievement. They're more likely to quit. And there's even now 30 years of research linking burnout to health problems, including cardiovascular disease and various other types of illness. So this led me to a really important question when I arrived in graduate school. What can we do about teacher burnout? And I got some inspiration from a teacher that some of you will recognize. Her name is Deborah Meyer. She's a highly innovative urban educator in Harlem who said that it's making a difference in the world that prevents me from ever giving up. And I got to wondering, is that true? Do teachers who feel that they actually make a difference become less burned out? Are they more able to sustain their motivation and their energy? Beth Campbell and I, a few years ago, conducted a study of teachers where we tracked their perceptions of job stress. We looked at their perceptions of how much they actually made a difference, and then we also measured their burnout rates. And we found that those who experienced a lot of job stressors were much more burned out, unless they felt that their job really made a difference. And for those teachers who really felt that their day-to-day actions had a meaningful, lasting impact on students' lives, job stressors didn't really matter. They weren't any more burned out. They were able to justify and cope with those job stressors by knowing, really, that the ends justified the means. That because my work makes a difference, it's okay to put up with all the terrible things that happen on the job. So this was really exciting. But I was a little bit dissatisfied by just looking at teachers' reports of burnout. So they say they're less burned out, but are they actually more willing and able to invest more energy on the job? Do they work harder? Do they work more effectively? I had a chance to try to answer those questions in a slightly different domain. I want to take you into a world that I think is actually more difficult than teaching by the data that I've collected. And this is actually part of the higher education world that no one likes to talk about, which is university fundraising. Think about the people who call you at night, usually during dinner, and ask you to donate your hard-earned money to your alma mater, as if the tuition that you and your parents gave weren't already enough. Now, this is a notoriously difficult job to do. Annual turnover rates exceed 400%. Entire staff quits every 2 to 3 months. You get rejected all the time. Rejection rates at most universities exceed 99%. And most of course, the people you call treat you like a telemarketer and yell at you. So it is no surprise that when I arrived at one of these call centers, I can't reveal the identity of the university, but suffice it to say that the mascot rhymes with the Wolverines. I found this sign on a caller's desk, and I found it really disheartening, but also highly amusing, and I thought I would share it with you today. This is a very sad state of the world if this is your experience on your job. So I started wondering, how does this job make a difference? When these fundraisers bring in money for the university, where does it go? Who benefits from it? And the data that I got suggested that over 60% of all the donation funds actually went to provide student scholarships. Underprivileged students, out-of-state students, merit scholarships. These callers are actually helping students get an education. But none of the callers had any idea where the money went and how really the work that they did had affected the lives of scholarship students. So I designed a very simple intervention where I brought in one scholarship student to talk for just 5 minutes about how the scholarship that he got that was funded by the work these callers did had made a difference in his life. And I was pretty sure that this wasn't going to do a lot of good because the job itself is still really unpleasant and really stressful. But I had an inkling of hope that by seeing the scholarship student, the callers would come face to face with someone who really appreciated and valued the work they were doing. It would show them how their work was making a difference and give them a little bit of extra energy to motivate them to work harder, smarter, longer, and ultimately bring in more money. The results that I got shocked me. They shocked me so much that I had to replicate this study 6 different times before I believed it. Now, the good thing about a 400% annual turnover rate is that you have lots of subjects to participate in studies every semester. So I was able to replicate this many times. And if you look at the results, what they actually show are pretty striking. You take a group of callers who gets to meet one scholarship student for 5 minutes. And after that, you follow them for a month. And you find that in that month-long period, the average caller spends 2.5 times as much time on the phone per week as he or she has before. Also nearly doubles in the number of calls made per hour for a full month after that one interaction with a scholarship student. And they're not just working harder, they're actually working more effectively as well. The average caller brings in 5 times as much money per week after seeing that one scholarship student face to face and hearing his or her story than before. That's a typical caller going from $400 a week to over $2,000 a week. That's 23 callers raising $37,000 extra dollars for that university per week than they had before. So I think this is really powerful. I think that for the callers, what they began to see is, I've now come face to face with someone who's really touched by my work, who really appreciates it. And now I know that my job makes a difference, so I'm going to work a lot harder as a result. The scholarship student also really appreciated it. We've done this many times. It turns out that the chance to express gratitude is really meaningful. To be able to say thank you. There's a lot of evidence, Bob Emmons and his colleagues, for example, have shown that just keeping a weekly gratitude journal is enough to actually increase both psychological and physical health over a 9-month period. So there's a real opportunity to show employees how their work makes a difference, but also enable those who benefit from it to actually say thank you and express their appreciation and gratitude. What does this mean for teaching? Well, one of my experiences as an educator is having a very clear sense of my short-term impact on students while they're in my classroom, but not necessarily knowing what happens afterward. When students graduate, do they remember anything that I've taught? Do they even remember me? Have they gotten any value out of my class? How do they actually benefit from what I've taught them? So I think there's a real disconnect between the short-term impact that we experience as educators and ultimately the long-term value that our knowledge, our teaching, our classroom exercises actually delivers. So I think there's some really exciting things that we can do about this. This is Monica Groves. Monica was a Teach for America teacher who was inspired to become a teacher because of her own first grade experience and just loved the experience of learning to read, to write, to understand new ideas and new concepts, and decided she wanted to pay that forward. Monica, like me, had never gone back and told her first grade teacher how much of a difference she had made in her life and really changing her career path. And this is where television turns out to be a really good thing, because Dateline NBC finds out about this and decides we can make a great show by connecting Monica with her first grade teacher, Mrs. Kaminga. So they organized a whole show that looks a lot like my fundraiser study, where Mrs. Kaminga is actually told that one of her students had credited her with changing her life and inspiring her to pursue this career. And she gets to fly down and surprise Monica in her classroom and see her in action, really trying to influence the next generation of students. Mrs. Kaminga says every single teacher's mission is to make a lasting contribution to the lives of students. And this was a truly heartwarming moment that brought me to tears, to see how the work that I had done in my own classroom had not only changed Monica's life, but then been passed forward to whole generations of students was incredibly powerful and memorable. Monica, of course, was really thrilled to have the chance to express her gratitude in return. And I think that this is something we ought to think more about in education than we do today. If you look at Monica and Mrs. Kaminga together, one of the things you see is a teacher reconnected with a former student in a way that we rarely are able to accomplish. So the benefit to teachers, I think, is pretty clear. To know how your job makes a difference in the long run, how it's valued, how it's appreciated. I think the benefits to students are also pretty clear. The students, when they're able to see these former students who have been affected in a meaningful way by this very class that they're taking, this very teacher that they're interacting with, really have a chance in a way they probably couldn't otherwise see. If they're very young, to develop self-confidence and efficacy when they see children just a bit older than them, having mastered the skills and the knowledge that they're trying to learn. With older students, potentially having role models to see alumni who have gone out and actually used the knowledge and the skill that they got in that classroom in a meaningful and valuable way. So I want to think a little bit about a new vision for the future of education in the K-12 setting. The vision is really simple. It's no alumni left behind. And I'm only half kidding when I say that. When we think about no alumni left behind, what I really want to do is ask the question, how can we bring alumni back into the classroom? A couple of ideas just to stimulate your thinking. One possibility is to get students together at the end of a semester or the end of a school year and ask them to create some kind of lasting tribute that really captures the most important insights that they're going to take away. It could be a YouTube video, it could be a Facebook site. I think there are lots of creative ways to use social media to really distill and consolidate what they're getting out of the class and potentially share with future groups of students. A second idea is to think about bringing in one alumnus guest speaker every year to identify one student from that teacher's classroom who's actually gone on to use the material in a significant way in his or her life, career, future studies, and be able to talk about that in a really legitimate and personal way. To be able to say, look, we know that the teacher is obviously committed to you learning this material, but here's a real student who's benefited from it, who can provide a serious testament to how useful this knowledge actually is. Another idea, I think, for no alumni left behind is really simple. Let's think about asking our own alumni who have taken our classes to become mentors to our current students. This is something I've now been doing in my classroom for 7 years. And I will tell you without a doubt, it's the most meaningful thing that happens in my class. To see my former students really bonding with my current students, having been in a similar stage of life, been in their shoes at one point, and having a small common bond, me as their professor, to really be able to share knowledge. And then all I ask of them is that they basically pay it forward. And so I think these are just a few examples of ways that we might be able to bring alumni back into the classroom to reduce teacher burnout and enable students to see the value of what they're learning. I want to close at this point with a very simple piece of advice. If you only remember one thing from today, and this applies especially to the men in the room, I strongly encourage you always to wear dark suits. Thank you.